Greetings. Good to see everybody, except Dave. Dave isn't here. Maybe Dave left. Oh, he's here. Well,
It's about to leave. It's good to see you, though.
It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Liang. You may notice that I don't have anything to remind me of what to say about Liang, and that's because I've known Liang for a very long time. Okay, so we were Caltech undergrads together. And before he arrived at Caltech, I was always the guy who got like a 70% on all the exams, which was an A+ at Caltech. Until my junior year, when there was a guy who always got like a 97%, and that was Liang. So it's not so good to see you. So anyway, Liang and I go way back. We moved to Cambridge together. I did experimental science. He was doing theory in quantum error correction and anyons, among other things. I guess we should, right? And then moved back to California to do a postdoc, and then built up a really impressive operation at Yale, studying quantum networks, these bosonic quantum error correcting codes, and a variety of other things. I really have enjoyed Liang's work for the combination of deep theory and really exploring the real world connections to experimental implementations of the ideas. He's since moved to the University of Chicago and is really spearheading the theory group there. And so I guess, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful to have you.
Yeah.
John, thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to come here and also meet and discuss with many people. And I think there are lots of exciting research going on here, which is inspiring. And so today I will maybe take this opportunity to maybe tell you a bit about some of the recent advances about like quantum error correction, and maybe about 10 years ago when about quantum error correction, I got kind of one coming from I forgot who, and say, oh, well, the field of quantum error correction is already closed because we already know the full error correction criteria, and also the fault tolerance also has been proven. But I think that nowadays it's I think especially like motivated by the experiment, there's a lot of like advances towards error correction, and we actually now like really want to implement it, and there are lots of new questions emerging from reality and also inside by the experiment. So this is actually like a kind of a good opportunity also for theorists to think about what we can kind of make error correction more feasible, and also correct practically more relevant errors, and also maybe apply error correction for some new applications such as quantum intensity. Yeah. So maybe in this talk I'll probably talk about like 3 topics, which is related to maybe on the hardware side with the bosonic error correction, or maybe at the chip level. Actually, like from Google's experiment, they find that the cosmic ray events can cause catastrophic errors on the individual chips. And we're thinking about how to use the distributed error correction to correct those errors so that we can store information not limited by those cosmic ray events. And also at the application level, we're also thinking about like, also can we use error correction to help quantum metrology? We build better quantum sensors to suppress the noise while without eliminating the signal. So this is kind of will be the 3 topics that I would like to maybe talk about today. But maybe to start with, I probably will start with the one probably the most straightforward and probably most relevant as a recent experiment is this cosmic ray event. Can we use error correction to suppress those errors? So I guess that maybe for this audience, probably like I might have already seen this many times with the Google experiment. They build this signal chip with a few dozen of qubits, and they can demonstrate the quantum advantage. And also like recently showing like we can do surface coding, even though still not at the break even, but it's getting very close. And also demonstrating we can simulate the non-abelian anyon grading systems. So I think it's very exciting on these directions. And of course, the longer term plan is really to maybe do some like a surface code or some like the topological coding that can help you to protect against local uncorrelated errors, so that you can kind of correct those errors while the information is stored as collectively over like a highly entangled state. However, one of the things that they find from the experiment is actually this simple model of the local uncorrelated error is actually not exactly a full description of what happened in the real world. What they find is that those chips, occasionally there could be high energy cosmic ray passing through the chip. And those high energy cosmic ray can create phonons and also twilight particles, which can induce qubit decay. So basically, once a while, like roughly once every 10 seconds, there is a high energy particle passing through the chip, creating a lot of excitations. And those twilight particle excitations, initially it's all qubits in stock, it's kind of have long coherence, and suddenly, like all the qubits kind of in that region becomes vastly decoherent. So basically, the qubit coherence time gets significantly degraded, and the traditional error correction might not be sufficiently fast to correct those errors. So this actually made, and moreover, those errors actually is over the entire chip, and it's also correlated. So that kind of like violates the assumption of the traditional error correction scheme of local uncorrelated. So the natural question is, okay, what can we do with these errors? And can we do some schemes so that we can still protect the information without being destroyed by these cosmic ray events? Because if you look at the rate 10 seconds, it's actually not very fast, but also not very slow. Right? It kind of like happens once a while, which can destroy these things stored on the chip. Okay. So the question is, what kind of error correction schemes? Of course, maybe I should say, on the hardware side, people are working really hard to suppress those things, maybe put shielding or maybe put metals on back to quickly absorb those other particles so that it will not cause some catastrophic error. But on the theory side, we also think like, what if suppose such things happen on the chip for whatever reason, is there a way we can still restore the information? Okay, so one possibility is actually to do something called a distributed quantum error. Instead of storing everything on the same chip, we can store things over multiple chips. Okay, and the things that kind of like we can also connect those different chips using these microchips by either pitch or catch, like quantum states, which has been demonstrated in different groups, including data. And also you can use those links to create entanglement or to test or to quantum gates, so that even though those data chips are separated, but you can use these micro links to connect them and kind of perform non-local fix. On the other hand, when you don't want to couple the chips, they will be separate chips. So if some cosmic ray events happen to individual chip, like here, it will not compromise the other chip. So it is still at this chip level, it is still local. And moreover, if the cosmic ray events kind of happen, what you'll find is that when you're performing those error correction on the individual chip level, you will find a significant increase of error rates. So that can error, let's say there is a cosmic ray event happening, which experimentally they actually like it. People actually indeed use those to essentially it's a detector for high energy particles. So once you have those, you can trigger it and label it as an erasure. Basically, the information stored on that chip will be erased. However, our quantum information is stored over multiple chips. So if the individual chip gets fried or erased, we can still use the remaining chip to restore the information. So this is the idea of doing distributed quantum error. Okay, so now we can kind of look into some of the simple examples. But the general idea is that the individual chip will be kind of like cause an erasure error, which we can identify them. But we can design quantum error correcting codes to correct erasure errors. For example, we can use n chips to encode one logical bit of information, and which can correct with distance d. The distance d refers to the minimum weight for the logical operator. We'll need party operators. We need d chips to recover information. But if you only erase d minus one chip, you can still recover the encoded information. Okay, so now let's say the cosmic ray events happen at the rate lambda, and once per 10 seconds, and it takes about time tau to recover those errors. Then you can come up with a dimensionless number, which is lambda times tau. And the typical scale for tau, we kind of also work with different tools. We can estimate that scale would be up for the millisecond. So typically lambda tau is 10 to minus 0 minus 4, which is very small. And if you can correct errors to high order, which is at time step tau, the error which will have more than d minus 1 erasure error, which occur with a probability lambda tau to the power d. And this corresponds to the error probability within a time step task. And from this error probability and time step, you can use this to divide by tau to get the error rate effectively at the logical level for this distributed error fraction. And take the inverse, which gives you the effective memory lifetime. And this is a curve which kind of corresponds to 1 over lambda tau to the power d times tau. Okay. And you'll find that when d is equal to 1, you can think that you don't do any coding. N equals to 1, encode one chip, encode one bit of information with distance 1. Then d minus 1 is 0, so that corresponds to uncorrected case, which is a flat line independent of the recovery. But when d is larger than 1, then you will get a slope. And a slope means that when you can do faster recovery, then you can actually restore the memory lifetime longer. Because what happens is that during the faster recovery, there's a smaller probability that error may occur during that recovery time, so that you can fully recover the erased error due to cosmic ray. Okay. And one thing you may notice is if d is larger than 1, then you can probably the larger the d, we can correct more erased error. And this is something that we will also look into. But let's first look into one simple example, which is the 412 code. Suppose you have question.
So I just want to understand the error rates that you were talking about. So in your little toy setup, you have like n chips, and I guess if they're all like identical and all of them have a cosmic ray hit them like once every 10 seconds, if you have 10 chips, then the actual error rate for any given chip to fail is 10 times higher.
Yes.
Yes,
there will be a combinatorial factor which provides proportional median.
Okay, got it. I was just wondering where in your analysis that popped up, but okay.
It will be in there when we actually have taken that.
Okay, perfect.
Also, does the cosmic, like what's the probability the cosmic ray hits all of the chips, or that?
Honestly, I don't know. Like, if it's come from a certain direction, if they're really unlucky, you're allowed to change that way.
I mean, doesn't it stagger produce all kinds of crap?
Excellent question. It depends on where, at which level, that's kind of the process happens. Because if having a high level, they will have a bigger radius of the region that may be destroyed. Right.
So how far apart are you going to put your chips? Like 100 kilometers?
Yeah. Well, okay. Honestly, that's a good question, and I don't know. Like, okay, hopefully Google will do another experiment with 2 chips and see if they're correlated, right? And but my guess is there are different processes, and so far we're assuming they're not correlated. But if they are correlated, maybe we need to put them further apart, or maybe have different designs. Yeah. Kind of different process. So, but yeah, so tentatively, let's assume the chips are sufficient far apart, the cosmic ray lengths are not correlated. Okay. Yeah. So one example to start with is the simplest code that can correct one erased error. It's called the 412 code, and it's a 4 kind of like chip to encode one logical information. And to constrain to just one logical bit encoded, we put like 3 constraints, which are 3 stabilizers, which are commuting operators. Every time you encode the stabilizer, you reduce the dimension by factor 2 for the heuristic. Okay, so with 3, then you restrict everything to like a 2-dimensional logical space. And one can come up with the logical operators. The logical can be the product of x minus 2, or which is equivalent to product of x3, x4, because we put the constraint x1, 2, 3, 4 product. Similarly, we can put the d-logical d1, d3, which is equivalent to d3, d4. And the way I write this explicitly is that once you write this, you can say, suppose I erase any, suppose x1 is erased, the first qubit is erased. I can still restore the information using the third force for the x logical and the second and fourth for the d logical. So basically, all the information is still exists. Okay. And now suppose that the first one is erased, what we can do is replace the first chip, which is bright, by another chip called 1 prime, and then try to measure the stabilizer. And that will help us to restore everything back to the logical space, replacing the bad chip with the new one. Okay. And for this 412 code, we only care about the leading order process. If there's error, we just want to restore it and then see what's the success probability. And here is actually the curve, because here d equals to 2, d minus 1 is 1, so we see a slope 1. Well, and if you look at the scales, basically like if you can do like about millisecond error correction rate, then basically you can restore those events like from 10 seconds to like a few hours. Just by this simple because the simple dimensionless parameter is lambda times tau, which is our reference to the screen. So that gives this truth. Now we can say, can we suppress more errors? And the natural choice is to choose a bigger code, and the next code we can consider is 713 code, which is 7 qubits to encode one logical qubit, which has distance 3, means it can correct 2 kind of erasure. However, if we just blindly plug in 713 code and do the standard stabilizer measurement, it has 6 stabilizers, then you will find that actually you will get the same slope as the 412 code, rather than a better slope. The reason is that some events could happen that could be really bad. The traditional circuit is if you have error during some of the stabilizer measurement, but you need an answer to measure the error. But the answer may be suffer from the cosmic ray events today. And this is the second order process. But however, this case, this catastrophic error could mess up the 4th qubit and later the 6th and 7th qubits. So if you look at the error, it's 1, 4, 6, 7 all be messed up, and you're only left with the remaining 3, and there is no way to correct for that. So the issue is we shouldn't do like fix the circuit. We need to do adaptive circuit. Which the idea is very similar to kind of like flag qubit design for people familiar with error. So once you detect the error, what you need to do is to adapt the recovery procedure depending on when you detect a second erasure event during the error correction. And by doing that, you'll find that basically once you detect that some bad erasure error happening again, you need to immediately adjust your strategy on the error pattern that you see. And then it turns out that if you only have the 2 of these guys being bad, then you can still kind of recover the error once you adapt to the strategy. Okay, so here I probably will not detail the whole schemes, but the keyword is adaptive scheme makes a difference. And then you actually don't need those additional like fancy like error corrections to be just to do it adaptively. You can find that the 713 code with this adaptive scheme called for column, then you can actually restore the slope. And in this case, if you do the millisecond kind of like recovery cycle time, you can restore it in a few days, a few months. Yeah, but of course, I guess that something else will definitely will happen before this time still. But at least it says that this scheme itself can in principle correct the cosmic ray catastrophic error to high order. So just as in case people want to get more detail about like at the chip level, we're still doing the surface code. And we can actually combine this distributed error correction with the surface code together. So basically the idea is that we can use these network links to connect the different chips. And you can think that you can use the links to create the Bell states between different chips and use those Bell states or some purified version of Bell states to do teleportive quantum gates between different chips. And by doing that, we can sort of enable you to measure some like collective like stabilizers across different chips. So this is labeled kind of as a ZD measurement, which is another way of error correction audience that corresponds to lattice circuit, which you can do so that you can kind of effectively do the merge and the split so that you can sort of effectively transfer the information from one chip to the other or performing some non-local gates. And but all these are maybe a pretty standard for like error correction. But we can, the point here is that it's compatible with the distributed error correction scheme at the second level. So therefore, in combination, we can suppress the error to high order, especially those catastrophic cosmic. Yeah. So just as a summary for this part, is basically that the cosmic ray events could cause catastrophic errors, and the traditional error correction code that the local independent error may not be valid, but we can still take advantage of the nature of those errors that happen on individual chips. Then we can do the distributed error correction at the next level to suppress those errors to high order. And it will still be interesting to see how do we really do the logical operation with the distributed error correction, or can we combine erasure error and the lower level error correction together to get a better performance. Okay. So that's the first part. And
yeah, so I was curious whether the tau is the amount of time to correct a single error, or do you have to like rewrite the entire chip in the time tau of like cosmic ray comes into your chip?
Yeah, so tau is basically the time that you need to do kind of this operation, the interchip operation. So what involves, you need to generate entanglement and purify it, and then do non-local gates to complete these lattice surgery operation. So the communication time between different chips can be pretty fast. And basically, you can do pitch and catch, and then you need to do like a few roundup in time, which is limited by your local data. So and also you need to do multiple of them. So basically, the overhead is probably like 10 or 100. So basically, it's feasible to do all these operations within about within about a minute.
Will it scale to the size of your chip? Or like?
So
what's the
we're
amount of
thinking
size?
some of the estimates we think about 10 by 10, only 20 by 20. Yeah, it's just a lack of two difference in those time scale estimates, so that's what's okay. Yeah, but the key thing is that when you do this lattice surgery, it ensures that those interchip coupling at logical level is also protected, which is a similar protection as good as the surface code. So that's important because we want to make sure the logical information is
So I think this is probably a fairly naive question, but why are the cosmic rays so bad for the moon surface? Are they going to be less bad for cold atoms? Is it like a cascade coming from the cosmic ray hitting other stuff, or is it actually hitting the superconducting circuit itself?
Yeah, well, I think that's here maybe one reason they see this kind of catastrophic error is the cosmic ray creates those other particles, and also it kind of propagates over the chip.
Isn't it mostly a muon?
Could be.
It's mostly muons, and it basically bores through the chip, leaving a trail of stuff. The cross section of a muon hitting an atom is like really small.
I see. So the other way to mitigate these errors would be good.
This might be like a bad question, but what are the constraints on the routing elements for this scheme?
Great. Yeah. So here the routers. This is more like a series drawing. Yeah. But I think there are ideas that you could kind of route in different paths for different things, and hopefully like in parallel. Yeah. And so one example is here. Notice that the signal is sending through a point. If you want to route them, you need to maintain the continuous of the signal, which it's possible you can even do frequency conversions at the micro domain with extremely high efficiency, greater than 99%.
So you also want to make sure that there's no errors generated on the router.
Yes. However, even if the routing may cause some error, you generate entanglement may not be perfect. You can do entanglement distillation to get the better for your data.
Yeah, 4-qubit surface code. I guess I was a bit confused for the logical qubit when you said the x1, x2 equals x3, x4. How do you ensure that they evolve in the same way so that if there's an error with one, you can correct it with the other?
Yeah, well, that's based on the stable element.
Okay.
And I will measure x1, x2, x3, x4. If they equal to 1, it ensures they're evolving the same. If not, some error must happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so let's move on to the next part, which is more on the physical level, like this is the bosonic error. Yeah, and so this is more like not at the chip level. It's really like at the physical level that can we do like a good qubit and in some hardware edition. And so one key difference between more traditional qubits and the oscillator is that actually for qubits typically we just have 2 levels. And if you want to do error correction, there's no way to introduce redundancy for error correction, so you need to have multiple qubits to do error correction. And also, once you introduce multiple qubits, each of the qubits may have errors, so actually you have more errors once you introduce multiple qubits. However, if you do a harmonic oscillator, what happens is that we know that the oscillator itself has different energy levels, so it already have a lot of redundancy in the system itself. Second is oscillator errors actually have some patterns. The excitation loss is always 1 by 1. So it only changes the excitation reduced by 1, or if it's dephasing, it won't even change the excitation. And so if you change it every time the loss only changes the excitation by 1, we might be able to identify those loss to be encoded information using different parity systems. By monitoring the parity, every photon loss will change the parity and so all these actually like says that maybe there's something we can design for oscillators that can correct these specific or dominant or practical relevant errors, which may be different from the qubit error. And this is actually kind of motivates the investigation of bosonic So the goal is we want to store information in the oscillator, which is longer than the cavity decay of the oscillator. Okay, so before we look into the quantum case, it might be good to look into what we do classically. So one thing which we kind of like doing nowadays is very often in the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and that actually uses also photonic mode. Then we packet of microwave modes, maybe in some thermal states, let's enter the detector in some coherent states. Okay, so one thing about the coherent state is you need two numbers to specify, amplitude and phase. And under attenuation, the amplitude will decay, maybe by a certain amount, you probably don't even need to know. But what's important is the phase is preserved under the attenuation. So let's store the information in the phase. So if you have coherent states alpha, which phase 0 minus alpha phase pi, you can store 0 and pi to encode one classical base of information. Now you can use 4 different phases to store 2 classical base of information. You do 8, 3 classical base. So this is a way to call the phase shift key, which is widely used in classical. Now the question is, can we extend this to a point? So let's look at this 4 coherent state phase shift key. In principle, we have a 4-dimensional filter space, which in principle can store 2 quantum states. However, we also need to have some redundancy to know whether or not it's a possible. So let's be less ambitious. Rather than store 2 quantum bits, let's store just 1 quantum. And also store it in the even photon subspace. And one way to construct even photon subspace is to be symmetric superposition of alpha minus alpha, which has even number of photons, or symmetric superposition of I alpha and minus I alpha, which is also even number of photons. And when alpha is large enough, these 2 states are almost orthogonal. If you really want to be rigorous for small alpha, we can always a linear combination to find some orthogonal space for the states. So, but the good thing with this even encoding, even subspace encoding, is that every time you use a photon, it will change parity between even and odd. And when you use 4 photons, it actually goes back to the original state. Okay, so there is kind of this like a simple circle of life. And all you need to know is the photon number modulo 4. And that can be achieved just by monitoring the parity.
I think this is actually from the Lion King.
Yes, that's
Do you guys remember that scene with the cat states?
Yeah. So basically, by monitoring the parity, you can detect single photon loss, and then also for these cat states with alpha being large, the back action from photon loss or no loss is actually very small. So therefore, you can still maintain a good superposition between those states, as long as these 4 different states are sufficient data. Okay. So that's actually like one error correcting code called cat code. And now the cat code has a good classical correspondence. Now let me introduce another code which did not have a good classical correspondence, called the hidden code. Okay, it's called hidden because it's even smaller. And it's a superposition of 0 and 4, which give you logical 0 and 2 photon Fox states. And the one feature is average photon number is 2 for both states. Any superposition or mixture of those states has average photon number. This is important because you can, if you have a photon loss or no photon loss, all those states are equal likely. So you cannot do Bayesian to infer which state is more likely because average photon number is the same, regardless what superposition or mixture. And moreover, if you have these states, you can come up with, if you have a photon loss, then this state 0 with a photon loss goes to 3 photon Fox state. 1 with a photon loss goes to the 1 photon Fox state. And this is an even subspace, and also those states are orthogonal. So basically, just by monitoring the parity, you will know whether or not there's a photon. And also, what's more important is that given the loss, actually the coefficients is actually the same, which means if we start with any superposition of initial logical states, it will give you the same superposition in the error space, which means you can design a unit to restore the original information to complete the error correction. Okay, so if you want to correct more errors, you can generalize it, and basically the coefficients here is just the sum square root of binomials, and that's why we call it binomials. And this generalization allows you to correct multiple errors. And if you plot the wave function, you will see that there is this rotation symmetry in your parameter space. And that rotation symmetry is related to the spacing of the photon. That's what you have. So this is another code, which in order to achieve binomial code, you basically also need to measure photon number multiple which is very similar. And now before I introduce the third code, it's actually will be good to see a connection between photon loss and added thermal noise. Because in classical communication, there are lots of discussions about the thermal noise channels. But for quantum case, the photon loss is actually in some sense can be reduced to a thermal noise. The idea is that if you have a coherent state, there's attenuation, which reduces to a smaller coherent state. What you can do is to do a phase insensitive amplification to amplify the states, so the amplitude can be restored, but at the same time, the initial vacuum noise also gets amplified. So that becomes converting the loss error into a thermal noise channel. And this is important to establish this connection because if you can design error correcting codes can correct the thermal noise channel, that code should also be able to correct lossy. The reason is, if you go to a lossy channel, you can always apply alpha operation to amplify the lossy channel, become a thermal noise channel. Then your error correction code can correct thermal noise, hence it can correct the lossy. Okay. So then that actually leads to the third code called the participant error correction. And that was a code invented about 20 years ago. At that time, the authors were thinking about correcting thermal noise. But later we find that that code can also correct loss, for the reason I mentioned earlier. So this code you can think also as a generalization of another classical code called the quadrature amplitude modulation code, which is suppose you know what's attenuation for a channel, then you can encode information in both traditional and quadrature. Here you have like 16 lattice sites which can encode 4 classical bits. If you know how much loss you have, you can match individual lattice as long as those lattices don't overlap. Similarly, you can do the quantum version doing some superposition of different coherent states that can give you the logical state. And if you zoom, here is the projection of the, here is the Wiener function of the projection operator to the logical space, which essentially you can think it as a fingerprint of what the code is. Because the good thing I like this using projection to represent the code is it avoids ambiguity of what is the logical 0, what is the logical 1, which people always argue with their favorite choice. But it doesn't matter because all that matters is the code space, which is the projection. Once you have it, everything is already determined. So now we can zoom in this projection of code space. You will see different lattices. Lattice spacing is square root of I. Then you can do the nearest lattice with the logical x, logical z. The second nearest lattice movement, displacement corresponds to stabilizer x, stabilizer z. And that corresponds to translation in the x or momentum opposition direction. And the one thing you can verify is that this for these operators, stabilizer operators, they actually commute with each other. They also commute with the logical operators. And but the logical operators, E and X, they are net. That indicating you have one logical qubit that's included in the system. And moreover, you can measure the stabilizer operator, which will tell you what is the deviation from original lattice up to square root, 2 square root. And for small added thermal noise, that's already sufficient to identify the thermal noise and restore the original lattice. So this is actually the scheme that shows that you can correct the thermal noise and consequently you can correct photon loss. So maybe I talked a bit too much detail about these different codes, but one thing I want to also mention is a good code like the participant characteristic. Ideally, correct, like if you have 10% photon loss, you can still restore the original information with the 99.99%. It's really amazing that you can correct a significant photon loss. Practically, I say maybe we can approach 10% loss, but we still restore most of them.
How many photons?
So for this number, it's about average about 5 or 10. It's not easy. Yeah, and also in the sum, they actually create the GKD state is about 10 dB. So it's about now let's look at a bit about the experimental kind of implementation of the bosonic error correction. And during the past 7 years, there have been significant advances in the experimental demonstration of bosonic error correction. So just a brief introduction of the physical platform, which is I think probably if you work with Dave, you might have seen many times. They're basically just a superconducting cavity which coupled to a transmount pivot. And when you largely determine between cavity and transmount, the hopping becomes suppressed and you only get the virtual coupling between the two, which gives you the dispersive coupling, which you can think that depending on the transform state in the excited or ground state, there is a frequency shift of the cavity. Or maybe you can think the transform frequency gets shifted by amount which is proportional to the number of excitations in the cavity. And the important thing is that this dispersive coupling is ordered 2 megahertz, which is much larger than the decay rate of cavity and transform. So you can think the system essentially as a coherent unitary evolution. And also the cavity transform and the transform. And also maybe during the past decades, there's significant development in terms of doing single shot readouts of the transform qubit, so that you can do a real-time non-demolishing readout of the transform without destroying the state of the cavity. And also you can do the FPGA real-time adaptation. So here there's a lot of stories about this part. Like the punchline is, first we can do universal control over both cavity and transform system. Given any unitary, I can use a gradient descent algorithm to come up with answers. Okay. Second is, with the capability of readouts the transform and do real-time forward, I can implement arbitrary quantum processes. Given any Lagrangian evolution, I can simulate that, and including like error correction, which you can also think it as a trace preserving complete algorithm. So therefore, in principle, I can say like this is already sufficient to do any quantum error correction. And maybe just to give you a feeling about how this can be done, I'll give one example is use this device, you can measure photon number parity, non-destroy. So usually when we say we measure photon number, we literally count the photon number, destroy everything. But here we want to do a non-demolishing measurement. We only get one classical bit of information about the parity and do nothing more. And if we initiate some superposition, we want the projected parts to be a superposition. And this is what I mean by quantum non-demolishing. And it can be achieved by following Ramsey-like experiment. We can use a 2-level system to share later qubit to couple to the cavity. So initialize the qubit in the superposition G plus Q. You let it evolve under this dispersive coupling Hamiltonian. Now this time you can interpret dispersive Hamiltonian as a shift to the excited level, which is proportional to number of excitations in the cavity. And you let it evolve for a time which pi over chi, so that every excitation in the cavity will shift to the excited level by base pi. So if we have even number of excitations, the excited level will be shifted by 2 pi, which is trivial. If we have odd number of excitations, we will shift the excited level by odd integer of pi, which is in this 0 between one and excited. So if we start from the symmetric superposition G plus E, it will end up in symmetric or anti-symmetric superposition, depending on the parity of the photon number. And you can unambiguously measure these two states, and that tells you the parity. And you only get one classical bit of information, and know nothing more about the system, which means the system will still maintain its initial superposition and in the projected substance. So that achieves the quantum non-demolishment of photon number parity. And once you have this, you can use it for your CAD code. So every CAD code, do the parity monitoring to identify every single photon loss, so that you know in the end how to interpret the encoded information. And here is actually like some of the early experiments where they have a time and vertical axis is the process fidelity, and if it's identity operation, the fidelity will be 1. And you see that if we do the best encoding without error correction, is to do 0-1 encoding, which is the minimum number of excitations equal 1 quantum bits, and that has a decay rate which is about 290 microseconds, limited by the cavity lifetime. Now, if we do the encoding but don't do error correction, the performance degrades because we have more photon system. But once you install the application, apply the error correction, then actually the lifetime gets slightly better than the best lifetime without using error correction. So that's indicating that the error correction actually helped a little bit, and that's what we call the break-even. So this is one experiment, and also like this year, kind of there are 2 more experiments. One at the Sustek in China, they actually did the photonic error correction again, but with the binomial code. And then once other is binomial code, whether or not you measure photon loss, you need to do some extra mimicry to restore in the multiple space. And what they see is this the one is a square dotted line. This is the cavity lifetime, while the other is the error corrected. So you get also about like a 10% improvement over that. Now, in Michel Devereux's group, they also recently did like a GKP encoding, and this is a bit more sophisticated coding. And in order to make sure the coding and everything done properly, they also use machine learning protocols to help to calibrate everything of the system to get the best performance. So what they found is actually this is the cavity lifetime, and this is the encoded logical lifetime, and which is more than 2 times longer than the cavity lifetime. So here's just maybe like a summary of the state of art for dynamic error correction. Is now there are 3 experiments about breaking with the cap code, binomial code, and fixed code. So basically all the codes have been demonstrated it's possible. One question is, well, can we do better? Right? Why we only get 10% improvement? And can we get like a factor 10 improvement or more? And the limitation is actually due to 2 factors. One is ancillary noise. You are using a very noisy transmon to correct the error, which might introduce more errors during the correction. So you cannot do error correction very frequently, which means you will have larger second order errors. Second is measurement error. If you measure the answer is wrong, then probably input the wrong signal and might mess up. So there are actually like new developments in this direction. One is how do we suppress the answer? For example, here when we try to do the parity measurements, it takes time to do the runs to accumulate the data. And during that time, your 2-level system might decay. Your transmon have ground excited states might have spontaneous decay. And that happens in this experiment maybe a factor of 10. So when a spontaneous decay happens, can we restore the image? The short answer is if you use the lowest 2 levels, you cannot distinguish whether it's originally from G or it's from the E decay. Okay. And maybe one can introduce some redundancy with multiple transmons, but the easy solution is actually to use the second excited level of the transmon. So the transmon is actually an aharmonic oscillator, so there are naturally second excited levels. So we can just use those. And similar to atom system, there are also some selection rules there, so that the second excited level only decays to the first excited level before it decays to the ground. So you can take advantage of this feature to encode the information between ground and the second excited level. To correct, once the decay happens, you'll go to another third level, right? And then we can use that first excited level to herald T1 decay. Moreover, the original space, the G and F, can still be used to measure the parity. And furthermore, there is some subtlety that we still don't know when the decay happens during this process. And that could cause some debating if the energy shift for E and F to the cavity is different. But there's some way to tune for the time matching so that the energy shift for E and F level to the cavity is the same. Then if that is the case, then we will have this Hamiltonian essentially commute with that jump off window, which goes from F to U. So if the Hamiltonian of this process commutes with the decay jump off window, then if you consider the trajectory, basically like it doesn't matter when the decay happens, it's equivalent to decay happen at the end because the Hamiltonian commutes with the jump. And in this way, you can call this error transparency. So that you can zip through the error to the end, only say use error to detect the decay, but there is no additional detect. And more generally, you can put it the whole problem in the setting that's actually that you have a very clean system with long coherence, but not very noisy, but limited control. And you have a bit noisy ancilla, but with a more powerful control. Can we develop a hybrid system so that we get the good part of the ancilla with control, but not inherit the noisy ancilla? And generally, when you mix the 2 systems, you only get the worst. So you get the noisy from the ancilla, but at the same time you get control, right? And if you need to do something in order to remove that, because the entropy is increasing over the system and ancilla. And the way to get rid of entropy is dimension. So basically, you need to kind of introduce the ancilla coupled to the system. At some point, you need to measure the ancilla to extract some entropy. And moreover, during this operation, it's kind of we're not continuously monitoring it. So there's some ignorance of if there's some error happening. And we need to make the control in such a way that it doesn't matter when error happens, it's equivalent to the error happening. So that's what, if you think this is developed by some like in mass equation, there is some like passing growth in some like Hilbert space, you will have different paths associated with different times that error may happen. But at the end, you measure answer in particular states, that these different paths should be equivalent to the same unit up to some overall. Then in this way, you actually can develop a custom dependent formulation, and those errors actually you can, it's irrelevant. You can correct. And that is the more general setting, including the error transparent gates as mentioned earlier. So this will be the way to design a hybrid system so that you can get the good part from the control of the ancilla, but not suffer from the decoding. Yeah, which is actually important all related to the fault tolerant quantum computing, except now this time we sort of have to look into the quantum control part combined with error correction. Because for qubit systems, you can say I have transversal gates. So the error don't cover. But here for harmonic oscillators, their central system is just a single cavity. Error could happen in a non-trivial way. So we need to make sure that whenever error happens, it don't cause a big mess. It is somehow even controlled so that later on it's still correct. Yeah. So maybe like I talked a lot about this discrete error correction with measurements and the extract syndrome. And there are also ideas that you can do continuous error correction. You can engineer dissipation to protect your Hilbert space. And one important thing with this engineer dissipation is that it can give you some additional features. So in particular, it can give you something called a bias preserving feature, so that you can do some encoding that one error, or maybe the bit error is exponentially suppressed, while the error and the other error is only increased linearly with the system. So, and then that would be actually very helpful, because if you think in the ideal case, we really can eliminate all the x and y error, only have the p error, then the next level of error correction will just be which is much easier to perform, and all the logical operations also. Yeah, so maybe just give you like a more intuitive picture. Suppose we have still a Bosonian system. We have coherent state alpha and minus alpha at the logical bit, at the logical qubit, and all the errors like the chaotic phasing, they always happen in the local region in your phase space. So therefore, if you can design the flow diagram, always push it towards these two steady states. It's actually two-dimensional state in subspace. Then basically, it will be extremely unlikely to mix coherent state alpha with minus alpha, because the flows or the engineer dissipation push it towards those steady states. And will give you an exponential suppression of bit error, while with only maybe a linear increase of the phase error. And with this way, one can design more different like hardware efficient error correction protocols, or even design the next level of coding to make such a scheme. And so similar to error threshold requirements, the quantum gates may have error need to be sufficiently small. Here, for these schemes, we can also estimate some threshold, which is a dimensionless number. And in this case, it is a ratio between the good and bad dissipation. So the good dissipation, for most of the previous studies, we find it needs to be about 1,000 times larger than bad dissipation. Then you're sort of like in the good region. That's why we do this engineer dissipation can correct more errors, and without causing like extra damage. And now recently we actually looked into this different code design called the squeeze cat code, which is you have a cat code and you squeeze it. It reduces the photon number, and that also can correct some bit errors. Then you can actually reduce this number back. So basically, they can reduce the demanding requirement of the strength of the good dissipation by order of magnitude, so that maybe hopefully experimented it will be more feasible in the image. Yeah. So I think that's probably what I want to talk about the second part of the Bosonian question. Okay. So yeah.
Is there like a fundamental limit to how?
Yeah, I want to know that too, if there's a fundamental limit. And my guess is probably it will not be about 1, maybe a bit larger than 1, but I don't know if 10 will be enough, or maybe like we cannot maybe 10, 100 is already.
Just wondering if you like couple noisy and still have happy.
Yeah.
Is there like a matter of the sort of introduce the distributor to monitor?
Yes, so here you need to actually like actually really look into the system and look at the different paths to see what's going on. And there is actually an additional layer you can further into the system is actually we're working on that as well. Is the cavity itself will also have another layer of error. So what happened more general setting, we call the general path independence, is the path will be equivalent up to the correct on the category. The units rate don't need to be exactly the same. They can be approximately the same with some deviation that the error correction. So if that's the case, then I think it can also be. It can also be. Yes.
Was for the cat code, you had on every time you had a photon loss, you showed just like changes the phase of the state rather than actually shrinking the state down.
Mhm.
I remember that when you don't detect a photon with a coherent state, though, the length of the coherent state just slowly shrinks.
So yeah.
Do you have to correct for that slowly shrinking over time?
Yeah, well, for that experiment, the first experiment they didn't do that, but in practice it can be done very easily. Just apply unity. You can just move the cat. Yeah.
Will that add extra thermal noise that you have to correct for later? Or
For that part, I don't think there will be a thermal noise. It's just like some back action. We went to text photon loss, coherent state, right? And you can have design units. And those units will typically are very big. And also you can also come back with any new dissipation. So, yeah, there are many ways to do that, but I agree that's for the first experiment, that's the only missing piece you want to claim for error correction. Yeah, but I think the later one is actually good.
Can you say a bit about what's involved in doing gates with these encoded qubits?
Yeah, so doing dates, that what's important is you need to make sure the dates preserve error. So you don't, the Z error is dominant, you don't want to do the date that makes the Z error. And the one way to do it is that you want to make sure that when you do those kind of like spin-up gate, when you rotate those blocks, you don't mix them. So and one scheme is you always separate those blocks when you kind of do like a condition on the control 0 or 1 block change, or they don't change. And that's kind of the underlying idea of doing the bias with the index. So one gate is not easy to do is a hard one. Right? You need to create superposition of blocks. And the one way to overcome it is you do state injection. Kind of a gate engineering, kind of a injecting. Prepare some superposition blocks and do something like similar to magic state to inject that. So, but it turns out that you get a good enough set that allow you to do bias. Okay, so maybe how much time do we have?
Probably like 2 or 3 minutes.
Can I have 5 minutes?
You may have 5 minutes.
Okay.
You've got a lot of questions during.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Okay, yeah. So the last part is about the sensing with error correction. And this is actually a project which I would say like for me it was inspired like around like 2016. There are 2 events, LIGO detection and also the error correction. And the first use for something model. And natural question is can we use error correction to help if it's relevant. And that was actually like met with Jiang at one of the program review conferences. We think, oh, maybe some of the coding might be useful, and then come back and ask one of my students, and later she told me, no, it's not possible. It's a no-go answer, and we come up with the proofs why it's not possible, and also come up with condition, say under what condition. Okay. So maybe just give you an idea, like maybe for most people with metrology, it's obvious that for quantum metrology, we want to estimate parameters associated with union. And if it's a 2-level system, you can do a Ramsey experiment to probe this frequency shift. And one thing is for quantum system is you can get Heisenberg scaling. If you wait long enough, you will have a better resolution of the frequency, and that sensitivity will scale inversely with the distribution. However, if you have decoherence, then your contrast will decrease. So when you wait longer, the contrast will have exponential decay, which limited at decoherence. But then you cannot integrate for a long time. You have to break the experiment into subsections. So then you restore the classical square root scale. So basically the message is decoherence is bad, kind of kill the Heisenberg scaling. Now then the question is, okay, can we restore Heisenberg scaling in the presence of decoherence? Like if we assume it's Markovian noise, then we probably have to use error correction. And the question is, can we use error correction to kill the decoherence, but not kill the signal? Which is the difference between error correction for sensing and error correction for computing. For computing, I can always pick whatever subspace I want for computation. But for sensing, there is a particular access which I want to sense the signal. and I just cannot do error correction on that axis because that's the signal I cannot. So this is actually the difference, which leads to a non-trivial conclusion that sometimes we can restore Heisenberg state and sometimes. Okay, so maybe let's look into like this is an invalid equation you can write across operators. But maybe what's important is what is a general protocol for quantum metrology that one can use allowed by quantum mechanics. So here is a scheme. So suppose this is the kind of the Hamiltonian evolution you want to sense the frequency shift. And you can have a probe, let it go through coupled to some ancilla. And here I just use a single probe, but couple with the ancilla and once a while couple to the evolution I want to measure, then couple to ancilla and interleave the process, and I finally do the measurement. And this is called the sequential scheme. And one people might say, well, why this is the most general? We usually talk about parallel scheme. We can prepare some highly entangled space to do it. But this parallel scheme can be obtained from the sequential scheme or simulated from the sequential scheme by swapping back and forth between my ancilla and your probe. Every time I use a new ancilla to do it, I can just say extract the state from ancilla to let it expose to the using the sequential scheme. The only overhead is here I have n parallel scheme, and I just introduce a factor of n overhead in my sensing time for the sequential scheme. Okay. So sequential scheme is very general, and moreover, it also allows you to, even this control fluid procedure, you can do error correction. Because you can dump the entity into some of the additional ancilla for the So now let's look at one example that error correction may help to suppress noise. This is a situation where you have debating, but you went to the Ramsey, but the system suffers from random X rotations. And the random X rotation, to suppress that, I couple my system with a perfect ancilla, just to remember whether it's initially 0 or 1. So I prepared this state, which is 0, 0, and 1, 1. You can think it as a repetition code. But because the asymmetry, only a system suffers from bit ancilla terms. So if later on, during some evolution, I find the system undergoes bit I can always restore it by check the ancilla and restore the system. So in this way, the quantum error correction procedure is just keep monitoring the product of system and ancilla, see if they agree or not on the D basis. If they disagree, I flip it. And I do it frequently enough. And here it's actually kind of like, suppose you initially start from the code word with this superposition. Then after some integration of time, then there will be two possibilities. Either there is no flip error or there is a flip. If no flip error, it goes as expected. If there is a flip error, the only difference is that now the system goes to some error state. And you can correct it by error correction. So up to the leading order, you actually restore the coherent unitary evolution, and the error only scales at the delta t scale. So if your delta t is small enough, means you error correction frequently enough, you actually restore the unitary evolution in your logical space, which altogether we have 4-dimensional space, but I only need a 2-dimensional logical space to have an effective unitary evolution without the or suppress the decoding. And with that, I restore the unitary evolution in my logical space, hence I can get Heisenberg for this step. Now, the tricky part is that once we have dephasing error, then it doesn't matter which basis you choose, which coding you choose, you just cannot work. Because once you have dephasing error, you just can, if you correct the dephasing error, you also correct it. So it seems that there are some conditions that error correction can restore the Heisenberg scaling and some conditions you can. And here is actually the condition that actually I still show sheet on that. Basically, there are some operators which are contaminated by your jump operator. For example, a jump operator itself, or maybe product of jump operator. And so, for example, if you have a dephasing, if you have a flip, then that contaminated operators include identity and Hardy X, which fortunately your signal generator sigma Z is not in that space. So therefore, there's always some operator components which are orthogonal to the messed up operators. Then you can use some way, you can use that orthogonal component to achieve Heisenberg scaling. On the other case, if you have dephasing error, then the operator space, which are kind of like in black span, which is messed by the noise, is identity and quality. And that spans the operator space, which includes the signal. Therefore, we cannot distinguish a signal from the noise operator. And that's why you actually, whenever you correct the noise, you will also correct the signal. Therefore, you cannot achieve hyperpolarization. So this is actually the you can get approved with the necessary and sufficient condition by different constructions of the code. But if you're interested, you can look into the simulation condition data for detail. Yeah. So I think since I'm running out of time, maybe I just want to point out that there are like further generalizations. We can find optimized error correcting code for this scaling, not just the scaling, but also the code. We can also design like conditions that the public fewer ancillars, not even use ancillars for this error corrected sensing, like collectively encoding over with multiple codes. And that's also something which we think there's a possibility of doing that. And also we can sense in multiple parameters. That's also possible. The idea is that your multiple parameter will span some operator space. And as long as that operator space is messed up, not messed up by those in-blending jump operators, we can also achieve asymptotic scaling for all those operators. And there's also, you don't need to be in-blending process for the noise process. That's also possible. Yeah. So kind of like the hope is that maybe we can, on one hand, with the quantum information bound to tell us what's the best we can do. On the other hand, error correction can actually help us to approach that bound. And we're thinking actually this gap is really small, and we probably don't need this. Error correction can give you, probably can correct most of the errors. But one thing I should be clarify is that so far we consider the most detrimental noise, which is in-blending noise. If it's color noise, actually some of the quantum control techniques can already do a good job. So probably don't need to use error correction because that's overhead is too So just a summary, kind of looking to at the physical level, chip level, and application level error correction. And finally, thank you people who actually did most of the work. And the first part of the part of photonic error correction actually had a lot of collaboration with Rob and the Yale group when they did the experiments. And also for the this catastrophic errors, which Alreza and Chen, they actually worked a lot into that. And finally for the error corrected sensing, which actually Suzhou, she was that the faculty position at this year. Okay, well, thank you very much for it.
Quite a number of questions. I guess we've already gotten lots of student questions, so we don't have to start with that.
If you're error correcting Lego, what is the fact that it's like 100 kilowatts of cavity power? Are there challenges associated with that?
Yeah, well, maybe I skipped that slide, which unfortunately we cannot do error correction for Lego, not Lego.
Okay.
We'll still suffer from the scale. But the useful part is that if there is any system which can give you the current effect. Suppose you want to sense some Hamiltonian, which is proportional to the self-curl of the cavity, and the cavity suffers from photon loss. I can give you an error correcting code that can sense the self-curl of the cavity with high signals.
And what's the limiting factor on LIGO that means that it's ruled out?
So limiting factor for LIGO is I try to measure Hamiltonian with the A dagger A. And the noise in-blending jump operator is annihilation operator. And this in-blending span includes the quadratic of the in-blending terms, which unfortunately this covers that. So the photon loss could effectively do some debating I cannot distinguish that from the
so we use the same Hamiltonian, a lot of the same operations. That would probably kill us too. Only we're at like you know minus 80 dBm instead of plus 80 dBm.
Yes, unfortunately this is one limitation. However, if you can convert your signal to this one, it's a quadratic, then it will not be in the in-blending span. And then you can design a code like this binomial code. And it don't have to be, it's a 0, 4, and 2. They have a sufficient difference in the photon number variance. And that will accumulate and coherently the relative phase between logical 0 and logical 1. And that can give you custom.
Okay, I understand.
But I don't know if there is a natural physical process which has this scaling, which will give useful signal, interesting signals.
Okay, well, I think what we should do probably is thank Liang, and then if you have more questions.